In 1177, Jerusalem was on the brink of collapse. The powerful Saladin, the leader who had unified Egypt and Syria under his banner, was marching with an overwhelming army toward the Holy City. For many, its fall seemed inevitable. How could a small and weakened Latin kingdom resist such a superior force? It is in this desperate scenario that one of the most remarkable stories of the Crusades emerges, the Battle of Montgisard. With only a handful of warriors, about 300 Templar knights and a few allies, the young King Baldwin IV made a bold decision that would change the fate of the Holy Land. This is the story of how an unlikely army managed to save Jerusalem.
To understand the magnitude of the Battle of Montgisard, it is essential to go back a few decades and grasp the context of the Middle East in the 12th century. After the First Crusade in 1099, European knights had conquered Jerusalem and established the Latin Kingdom, a Christian monarchy amidst vast Muslim territories. Despite the religious fervor sustaining these conquests, the kingdom's survival was always fragile. It relied on reinforcements from Europe, disciplined military orders such as the Templars and Hospitallers, and the ability of its kings to govern both Christians and Muslims living under their rule. On the throne of Jerusalem in 1177 sat the young Baldwin IV. Known as the Leper King, Baldwin had contracted the disease in his adolescence, which limited his health but not his courage or strategic intelligence. He became a symbol of resistance, leading battles even while physically debilitated. On the other side stood Saladin, one of the greatest strategists of his era. A skilled politician and military commander, he had unified Egypt and Syria, becoming a far greater threat than the Crusader kingdoms were used to facing. For Saladin, Jerusalem was not only a military objective, but also a spiritual one. The Holy City needed to return to Islam. This clash of realities, a sick king defending a small monarchy against a rising empire, forms the backdrop of the battle.
By the end of 1177, Saladin believed the perfect moment had come to destroy the Kingdom of Jerusalem once and for all. He had gathered a massive army, estimated by some sources at more than 20,000 men, including heavy cavalry, mounted archers, and infantry. By the standards of the time, it was a force almost impossible for such a small kingdom to face. Jerusalem was poorly defended as part of the Crusader troops had moved north, believing Saladin would attack through that region. Baldwin IV, only 17 years old and already weakened by leprosy, had at his disposal a minuscule contingent in comparison. A few thousand soldiers, local auxiliaries, and above all, about 300 Templar knights, trained and disciplined warriors considered the elite of Christian cavalry. Confident, Saladin marched toward the Holy City. For him, it would be a swift victory. The capture of Jerusalem would represent not only military glory, but also the spiritual legitimization of his leadership in the Muslim world. The Latin kingdom seemed doomed. Many advisors urged Baldwin to retreat and avoid confrontation, preserving the few forces he had left. But the young king realized that if Jerusalem fell, the entire Crusader effort in the Middle East would end there. He had to take the risk, and that was exactly what he decided to do.
Among all the forces that made up the Crusader army, no group drew more attention than the Templar Knights. Founded just a few decades earlier, the Order of the Temple had been established to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Over time, however, it became one of the most powerful military orders of the Middle Ages. The Templars were warrior monks. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but also trained daily for war. The Templar rule required that they never retreat from an enemy unless outnumbered 10 to 1. This stubbornness made even larger armies hesitate in the face of a Templar charge. At Montgisard, about 300 of these knights were present. Although numerically insignificant compared to Saladin's forces, their presence proved decisive. The legend of the 300 Templars comes precisely from this extraordinary proportion. a small minority daring to face a massive army. They were not alone, of course. There was also Crusader infantry, the Turcopoles, local cavalry, often of Syrian origin, and other volunteers. But it was the discipline and shock of the Templar cavalry that broke the Muslim army's confidence and allowed victory. Thus, the Templars became the symbol of Christian resistance in this episode. More than soldiers, they represented faith forged into steel. Saladin believed Jerusalem would fall easily. His army advanced toward the city with virtually no resistance, looting villages along the way and spreading terror among the kingdom's inhabitants. With so many men and resources, he did not worry about the possibility of a significant counterattack. To Saladin, it was only a matter of time before his banner would fly over the walls of Jerusalem. However, the young king, Baldwin IV, did not intend to wait passively for the siege. Gathering the Templar knights and what remained of his forces, he decided to intercept the enemy before they reached the city. It was a bold, risky, and even desperate maneuver, but also the only hope for survival. The encounter took place near Montgisard, a strategic location between Ramla and Jerusalem. Confident, Saladin believed any direct clash would be easily won, as his numbers were overwhelmingly superior. But the Muslim army did not expect Baldwin and his Templars to launch such a sudden offensive. The king himself, sick and debilitated, was brought onto the battlefield in a litter holding the relic of the true cross, the ultimate symbol of Christian faith. The sight of the young monarch facing death alongside his warriors inspired courage in the Crusader troops. It was a moment to risk everything in a single battle. The charge of the Templar Knights was about to begin.
The confrontation at Montgisard was brief but brutally intense. Saladin had spread his troops across the territory, confident that he would meet no serious opposition. When he realized the Crusader advance, he was taken by surprise. His forces were scattered and unprepared for direct combat. Baldwin IV, aware that he could not afford a prolonged battle, risked everything on a swift and devastating attack. At the forefront were the Templars, in their white mantles marked with the red cross, ready for the charge that would decide the fate of Jerusalem. The heavy Crusader cavalry advanced with ferocity against the Muslim lines. The impact was devastating. Spears, swords, and shields shattered enemy ranks, while the Templar discipline kept their formation intact. The psychological shock was as great as the physical one. Saladin, who until then had seemed invincible, saw his army falter before a handful of knights. King Baldwin himself, though debilitated, took part in the engagement, inspiring his men with the true cross raised high. For the Christian soldiers, it was as though they were fighting under divine protection. Within a few hours, the Muslim army collapsed. Panic spread, and the retreat turned into a chaotic flight. Many were killed during the pursuit, while Saladin barely escaped with a small group of personal guards. Against all odds, Jerusalem was saved. The victory at Montgisard was hailed as a miracle. To the Crusaders, it seemed impossible that such a small army had defeated the largest force Saladin had ever assembled up to that point. The battlefield was littered with dead enemies, and the survivors fled in disorder, leaving behind weapons, supplies, and even confidence in their sultan's leadership. Baldwin IV, the young Leper king, instantly became a hero among his subjects and allies. His courage in facing Saladin under such disadvantageous conditions enhanced his prestige and bought the Kingdom of Jerusalem a few precious years of survival. The Templar Knights, in turn, further cemented their reputation as unbeatable warriors, capable of defying absurd odds. For Saladin, the defeat was a shock. Accustomed to victories and the continual expansion of his power, he was forced to retreat humiliated to Egypt. His army, once considered invincible, had been shattered by a force tiny in comparison.
This experience led him to reassess his strategies, realizing that underestimating the Crusaders could be fatal. In Jerusalem, the news spread hope. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the holy city was protected by an invisible wall of faith and courage. Yet in reality, Montgisard had been a glorious but temporary victory.
In 1187, just 10 years later, Saladin achieved his ultimate revenge at the Battle of Hattin, where he crushed the Crusader forces and captured the true cross itself. Shortly after, Jerusalem fell into his hands, ending nearly a century of Christian rule over the city. Yet Montgisard remained in the collective memory as one of the most glorious moments of the Crusades. It was proof that courage, faith, and discipline could challenge even the greatest armies. For many, that day represented not only the salvation of Jerusalem, but also the triumph of the improbable over the inevitable. If you enjoyed this epic story and want to discover more incredible moments from history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of our narratives full of courage, battles, and events that shaped the world. Join us on this journey through the past.